I watch the Black Belt Barrister quite a lot, and I have been very enlightened by his interpretation of the law. I've never thought he did not have his finger on the pulse until he said something in a recent video which I took issue with. It's not that I'll never speak to him again. Actually, I've never spoken to him once. It's not that I'll never watch his videos again. I will carry on watching them, for sure. But he made one comment that seemed to me to be a typical lawyer's comment that was out of the human realm. Let's just phrase it like that. And what he said was, riots are not acceptable. Yep, I'm with him there. Destruction of property, injuries, all of them not acceptable. He said riots are not acceptable in a democracy because we have another way of voicing our frustration and displeasure with a government. We can vote. And then he said most of the people who were rioting didn't vote. And he was right about that. What he was wrong about was the actual principle of the vote in this present society. I'm going to be talking about this woman here, the keyboard warrior who was banged up for 15 months. But before I do that, I'm going to talk about the efficacy of voting, and also to tell you that I'm Granniopteryx. I'm on YouTube, Rumble, BitChute and Minds. So let's have a look at this thing about voicing your dissatisfaction with the government by voting. Well, that's exactly what people did, didn't they? They didn't like the way the Conservatives were carrying on, so they didn't vote for them. The problem is that in the traditional Labour voting parts of the country, the only other option for most people would have been the Labour Party. And they were doing that because they had been given the message that the Labour Party is for the working man. Now, that has been less and less in evidence since Tony Blair. But still, there's a sort of traditional hangover that would have had people voting Labour if they'd bothered to vote, simply because their parents had and they felt a bit guilty about voting Conservative the last time. But there was nothing in what the Labour Party was talking about before they took power about stopping people from talking. So even the people who did vote were not voting for what the government is doing now. Let's face it, the way that this government is handling the aftermath of a terrible crime, that's not the way any sane government could be imagined to have acted. So, yeah, I do not endorse riots, but I can see why they happened. And simply saying, well, you should have used your vote more responsibly is not the answer. And I know that's the law, and I know that the Black Belt Barrister was not saying anything out of order in his comment, but I believe that what he was saying was simply not taking into account human nature, which, as the English law at any rate, has always had the principle of the man on the Clapham omnibus. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Clapham omnibus is, I shall tell you that Clapham, at the time this expression came about, Clapham was a sort of middle and lower middle class suburb of London. And the omnibus was a public transport at a time when very few people owned cars. But when they did, they were all bosses. And that has been a supposed to have been a principle of British law, or at least English law, since that expression was coined. That is, that the law should take into account the common sense feelings of the suburban commuter who comes in, does his clerical work in some office in town, and then goes back in the evening to his wife and family. Yeah, because wives and families were there in their houses at the time. Wives didn't go out to work, did they? So that was the basis. Now, things have changed, but that is still a sort of hangover basic assumption. So I think that the man on the Clapham omnibus would disagree with what the judge said in this case. Jailing her for 15 months on Wednesday, the judge told her that even people like you need to go to prison. He didn't even say deserve to go to prison. He said need to go to prison. And that seems to me to betray an attitude of I'll teach you a lesson. Not you personally, you and your social group, you and your level of person. Now, the man on the Clapham omnibus would not consider that English law. And this is what I mean when I say I disagree with the black belt barrister. He was talking about law and he was quoting it perfectly accurately. But he wasn't taking account of the fact that the law is endlessly to be interpreted, and that means taking into account human nature and human foibles as well. So when people riot, when they explode into fury about the deaths of 3 children, you have to take into account what lays behind their fury. And as the black belt barrister made that off-the-cuff comment about you could have voted properly, you know, which is absolutely 100% correct, don't get back at him. By the way, I'm not calling for any campaign against him. He's a very honest, intelligent man who gives a lot of people insight into British law and should be entirely respected. But you can disagree with people you respect as well, can't you? And I disagree with him on this. But then, of course, I'm not a lawyer. And the interesting thing is that Keir Starmer is a lawyer as well. And I did mention in one of his early diatribes against the unrest, he was talking like a lawyer to a jury. He was making a prosecution's case instead of understanding the people, some of whom would have voted for him, but who in any case are supposed to be under his care. Now, this woman is not a keyboard warrior. She's a member of a Facebook group, and her husband, who is obviously the person who subscribes to the Clapham omnibus theory, said his wife of 29 years was not a racist. It's nothing to do with racism. I don't know why. If somebody is angry with now look, let's get this straight. She probably thought at the time that the perpetrator was a Muslim, because that was the story that was going round. And in many ways, the government is responsible for this theory. And it is an entirely reasonable theory based on form, of course. So she probably thought that it was part of a Muslim terror campaign, and that's not racist. Muslims are not a race. And, you know, this poor fellow, David Sweeney here, he is doing what the MSM have encouraged people to do and conflated a disagreement with Islam and racism. That's a terrible thing, and people should get that thought out of their minds smartly. Yeah, and it was caused by an emotional breakdown after the Southport knife attack, and I can believe that. And she was a quiet, sheltered person who exploded in fury on Facebook because she thought a Muslim had, and because the story was going round that it was a Muslim who had killed 3 sweet little girls on a holiday, summer scheme or whatever it's called. And the judge said, even people like you need to go to prison. Now, what had she done? Gone to the mosque and blown anything up? No. She'd said that she'd said something unpleasant, which anyone could have said, look, that's not very nice. Why don't you tone that down? Why don't you take your post down? As a matter of fact, apparently she did want to take it down and was not technically savvy enough to do that. And she didn't know how to do it. And then he says, breaking down in tears, he told the Telegraph it's completely out of proportion. Yes, it is. And that man on the Clapham omnibus would say that as well as me. It's just ridiculous. It's a big loss. She's my right arm. And then he says, 3 police cars turned up. There were 3 officers. What's that about? It's too big a force for what it was. It's just crazy. It does anger you. It's over the top, well over the top. It's hard to come to terms. And I just want to slip this bit in here. An article here. The Met Police is failing in almost all work areas, it says here. The force was assessed across 9 areas and graded as requires improvement or inadequate in 7 of them, including investigating and preventing crime. And yet they could manage, whichever force it was, could manage to field 3 officers to arrest this woman. Who, she's not like she's a cult leader. Whatever she says on Facebook, nobody's going to go out and act on it. She just got angry on the night because we watched a news item with her. It just wound her up because of what had happened to the 3 girls. They live on the outskirts of a village. And there, you see, she's not that sort of person. We've got a neighbour next door who's Asian and knows Julie is not a racist. And there, again, this conflation of Islam or Islamism and racism. And actually, frankly, so what if she was a racist? People are allowed to have their private opinions. But, yeah, all right. So it says here, Sarah Badrawi told Chester Crown Court that one of the group's 5,100 members became uneasy at a number of comments posted on the site and alerted the police to the post. Whatever Facebook group that was, I will suggest to the administrator that it is shut down straight away. That person, instead of just making a comment, none of this is very nice, we don't know about this yet. This person just reported the whole Facebook group to the police. Certainly the group is not safe with somebody like that as a member. I'm just saying. And I'm not saying go for. Now, I was going to say her. I'm quite sure it was a her. I am sorry to say. And then Sweeney, who is also David's full-time carer, so the state is going to have to deal with caring for this man as well while she's off in prison. She told the officer, I'm not being rude, but there are a lot of people saying it. And indeed, there are. That doesn't make it right, by the way. She said she posted the comment in anger, had no intention to put people in fear. Judging from the Muslim defence leagues of various sorts, parading through towns shouting Allahu Akbar at their fellow locals, I would say fear was the last thing on their minds. Sweeney pleaded guilty to sending a communication to convey a threat of death or serious harm, an offence under the Online Safety Act 2023, which is a conservative piece of legislation, by the way. And that's why there's no choice about what to vote for, because they did this. And they always say, oh, you know, it's going to be reasonably applied. And then it gets applied to somebody like this. Just look at her face. Okay, well, yeah, that's a heartbroken family, everything else. Who are they going to vote for next time? Reform, I hope. And, you know, whatever I disagree with Reform about, my hope is that if they get a government, they will spend their first term in office junking all these laws, junking them all. Yeah, we're going to get some terrible stuff online, but junking them all. Free speech is free speech. And then you get, when you get laws like that, you get judges saying people like you need to go to prison. No, people like people who break police women's noses need to go to prison. As I said in my previous video, people who drive cars through Golders Green shouting rape threats at any Jews who happen to be passing. It was Saturday in Golders Green, so there would have been a fair number of them. They need to go to prison. People who loot shops need to go to prison. This is a person who is caring for somebody who is obviously not well, taking a load off the state. They are not people who need to go to prison. They are people who need to be told, that's not very nice, get it down. If you can't take it down yourself, we'll assist you. That's all. And the police were so glad to send 3 people there. When there's this entire list of failures in their records. It's not just the Met. Okay, till next time. You can help my channel by clicking like, by subscribing, by clicking the notification bell, and by sharing if you're so inclined. Links to my other channels are in the description, also links to donation sites, but really the best way you can help me is simply by clicking like. Thank you.